Greetings and welcome to my channel. This is Sorcerer Tal. You can also find me on Facebook in the Sorcerers Guild. Today on Unorthodox Weirdery, we are going to be talking about the phenomena of Otherkin. Now, as I always say, in this particular playlist, I will be focusing heavily on my own thoughts and opinions, so nothing that I say should be taken as guild policy or position on any matter. Except for that, in this case, I would like to state that the Sorcerers Guild does consider the Otherkin phenomena a valid magical path. Okay, so, the Otherkin. What exactly is this? This is people that believe that their soul has more of a kinship with some other type of being than human. There are people that believe that they were born as that they are a wolf spirit in a human body, fox spirits. This also goes into the fantastic, such as elves, fairy, things of that nature, as well as demons, even gods. There are people that believe they are the avatars of gods. Okay, now, this may be the first time you've heard this word Otherkin, but the concept itself is actually quite ancient. Let's talk about, first of all, the idea of the gods and people believing that they are the avatars of gods. This is very ancient. The Egyptians often believed that their pharaoh was an incarnation of a god. Many of your temples in Greece and Rome even, the high priest or high priestess of a particular temple would be seen as this exact thing, the avatar of that god. So this concept that someone is a god in human form is not new, but there can be more than one at one time. This is not saying they are the Loki. That's another good example, is there were a lot of practitioners in Norse mythology that called themselves Loki, that worked with Loki. And they believed themselves to be an avatar of Loki. This doesn't mean that they are the Loki. Simply they are fulfilling that role in human form. And there could be more than one Loki at a time. In fact, I don't believe that they disputed with each other over this matter. I think they just accepted that they were all avatars of the same being. Okay, so we'll go back to the fantastic and fanciful in a moment, but I want to start more with this idea of animal spirits. This again has a very ancient tradition. There's a lot of shamanic work where one takes on the form of a spirit to travel through the astral realm. In fact, I have Strid here, which is a mink skull. I've shown her in previous videos. And what she is a type of caw that rather than just existing for me and like I inflate her and speak to her and have her do things, she is capable of that to some extent, but she is more like an astral puppet. I place her on my wrist like so, and push my energy through that finger, and I actually will go on to the astral by entering her caw and going out onto the astral. And when I do that, I am not in a human form. I assume the form of the mink. And I'm essentially wearing her as a costume. And that is one aspect of this Otherkin phenomena. But what about people who believe they were born a wolf in a past life? Well, I myself fall into this category. In fact, the first life that I ever recalled as a child, I told my parents that I used to be a wolf and that a farmer shot me while I was running through a field. I still recall this memory. But do I believe I am a wolf spirit trapped in a human form? No. I believe that I have led multiple lives as a wolf, and I remember quite a few. But I have also led other lives as a human. I believe that my soul is capable of linking up with both frequencies. I believe also that, or suspect, well, I guess believe, suspect, what's the difference? Neither one of these are a thing I can prove, but I think that all people are capable of this. It's just not something that most souls are drawn to. Once we get into a particular pattern of being born a human, or being born an elk, or whatever it is that our soul has developed a pattern for, we tend to follow our patterns. We tend to sync up. We tend to follow patterns. Like I just said, cycles. And the same things often become repeated in different forms in patterns. So once you've been born an elk once, you're probably going to be born an elk again and again, or a human, or whatever type of being that you are. So that if you've been born a wolf 50 times and then suddenly you're born as a human, there's probably some transition there. And I see why these people sometimes have problems with that. I can't say that I have no issues there myself, but it's mostly that most of my own past life trauma comes from when I had 4 legs rather than 2. But that's a different video. We'll talk about past life trauma in a different video perhaps. But my point here is that I believe this is a valid phenomenon, but it doesn't make a person unique. We've probably all had lives like this. Or we are drawn to those in a pattern, like I said. The other possibility there is that perhaps when we are in a human brain, it doesn't spark these memories. Maybe you've lived many lives as a mouse, but you don't do things as a human that remind you of being a mouse, so it doesn't bring up these memories. Or perhaps your human brain references them differently. For example, many of these lives that I remember being a wolf, before I got used to the idea, before I accepted the idea that, yeah, I really was a wolf in past lives, I would have this strangest types of memories of biting into elks with human teeth. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And, well, over time I got used, I accepted that what was going on was I was remembering it wrong because my brain was filtering it out. Yeah, your brain likes to put things into its perspective, try and make it part of its tapestry. So if I'm remembering crawling into a den or biting an animal, it tried to make me remember that as a human because that is its sphere of reference that the human brain works in. So maybe we just don't remember these things well when we walk inside of men. Okay, so there's more on this animal thing. Clearly, this is going to be kind of a long video. I have a lot to say on this topic. Okay, so we'll continue with this thing of becoming animals. There is also, like I said, in the shamanic tradition, the idea of becoming this animal, but not just for astral work, but there is also the idea of being a berserker, of entering into a frenzied state. This is where the idea of berserker comes from. It is bear shirt. One who puts on the shirt of a bear so that their soul, not their body, yeah, we're not talking about transforming into the shape of a bear or a wolf. We're talking about putting on the outfit so that you can take on its form and its ferocity, so that you can enter into a frenzied berserker state. I have this as well. Mine is not like the mink with the skull here that we talked about earlier. I have a wearable tulpa that I have created through mental work, mostly, and some spellcraft that I call Mr. Growly. And I enter into this state and my astral form changes when I enter into frenzy gnosis, or berserker state. But does that mean I am a werewolf or a were-growly? Depends on your definition of the word, I suppose. I don't really identify myself as a werewolf, even though I do remember having been a wolf in past lives, and I could, in frenzy gnosis, probably shift my astral form into a wolf, but I prefer the growly. Okay, so like I said, I have more to cover here. Okay, so let's go on to these fantasy creatures once again. Now, it's quite possible that those that believe they are elves, fairies, things like that, are also wearable tulpas, yeah? Not ones that they've created with frenzy gnosis, but one that they have created with maintained belief over time that they wear. But I myself, I do believe that fairies, demons, and all these spirits do exist. Now, fairies and things like that, they are actually not astral beings. Rather, they are like condensed versions of souls that exist on the energetic equivalent of the material plane. Yeah? They are like spirits, but more condensed. And they live here on the material plane, but on the separate aspect of it, of which the our two aspects are no longer balanced, like they should be appropriately. I call this the thickening of the veil, but that's probably not the best term for it. It's not the best metaphor, because there is the area in between. I don't know. That's a different video. We have the material plane and the energetic equivalent of the material plane. I'm not going to try and explain it in any more detail than that on this video, because we've already got plenty to cover. But anyways, the Fae and those types of creatures, that's where they exist, is on the energetic equivalent of the material plane, and our bodies are, of course, on the solid physical equivalent of the material plane. So, these two places are out of balance, but these beings do exist. Some of these beings have, because the things are out of balance, they have trouble affecting this side. Some of these Fae beings, I do believe, have chosen to enter into human bodies out of frustration or boredom, perhaps, because they are unable to affect the other side fully. So, in order to affect that side, their normal forms, as I said, are essentially condensed souls. They are very similar to a human soul, and they are able to replace the soul within a human. And once they have managed to enter into that cycle by crawling inside of a human, perhaps in a possession type nature, they then are able to enter into the human reincarnation cycle and be reborn as humans. And perhaps this explains a lot of the Otherkin. This is, I assume, theoretical, and as I've said, nothing I said here should be taken as guild policy or position on any matter. But that is how I believe that these fairies, elves, and other beings have entered into the human reincarnation cycle, and I do believe that some people genuinely are these types of beings. Why couldn't they be? If you believe that these beings existed back before the two aspects of the material plane became separate. The gap in between needs to be thinned, I suppose. That would be a much better metaphor. But as I said, that is a different video. Okay, so let's cover this last bit that is talked about in the Otherkin community often, and that is the idea that one actually has Fae ancestry. Okay, well, as I said, I do believe that at one point there was a proper balance between the two sides of the material plane. And these elves, fairies, and such were able to manifest on our side of the material plane in the physical world. During that time, if we believe the old myths and legends, there were many gods that bred with humans. There were many elves and fairies that bred with humans. There are many myths that tell us these things happened. And there are no myths saying that all of their intermingled children died for some reason when the gap was created. So why couldn't we have traces of this DNA? In fact, when we do DNA tests, we find that we have traces of non-human DNA. We have the Neanderthal, the Denovian, that we're able to identify. But we don't know anything about the Denovian. other than that we've given it a name and identified it really, or we don't know much about the Neanderthal. But even these are traces of non-human DNA. And these are only the traces we can identify. There are many other traces. I don't remember the exact number, but I think it's like 54. Don't quote me on that. I read an article on this once that there's a plethora of non-human DNA that is mixed in with the Homo sapien human DNA. Yeah? Why couldn't some of this be the things that we termed elves or fairy? Nothing to prove that it isn't really. Nothing to prove there is, you could argue. But anyways, I suppose that will be it for this episode. Thank you once again for joining us. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please take the opportunity to do so now. Until then, bright blessings and an interesting fate. This has been Sorcerer Tal.